In 1968 Michigan, the remains of all 6 members of the Robinson family were found. They were a rotting mess inside their log cabin in the woods. The person who did this was never found. You're watching Darkness Prevails, the best place to share your creepy stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. I don't blame people for wanting to stay in cabins for their vacations. Nature is beautiful after all, but it's also extremely dangerous. As you'll soon see with these allegedly true stories, some terrifying things can be found when you stay at a cabin in the woods. If you want your story seen in a future video, I'm looking for creepy stories from Disney World or Disneyland. Send me your experiences at darknessprevails.org/submit. Also, stay till the end for my favorite early comments from my previous video. Now, let's take a look at the life-size creepy versions of Lincoln Logs. Number 1. Skinwalker in the Redwoods. Submitted by Art L. This happened when I was 12 years old and spending the summer with my Aunt Maria, Uncle Joseph, and 2 cousins in California. The summer I spent with them was a lot of fun, as it was my first time in California, and I can say my time spent with them was a lot of fun. I got to bond with my cousins, learned a few songs in Hebrew, went to Universal Studios, Legoland, SeaWorld. It was amazing. But there was one incident that occurred that I first thought was a bit peculiar. 4 years later, when I found out what truly happened, I could never look at the Redwoods the same way again. Along with the numerous trips to theme parks, we also went camping in the redwood forests with another family. Now, the mother of that family is important to the story. Let's call her Rosa. We stayed at this national park where Rosa's family rented a cabin, and we were camping out right next to it, just a couple of minutes walk into the woods, which isn't so bad in the daytime when you can admire the awe-inspiring majesty of the 100-foot-tall, centuries-old redwood trees. But it's an entirely different story once it's dark outside, and you're trudging through the area trying not to trip on a branch while shining your flashlight around you as you attempt to keep up with the rest of the group. And so, after a day of hiking, we were hanging at the cabin as usual, eating dinner, laughing, playing board games, the whole shebang. Of course, the time came for me, Maria, Joseph, and my 2 cousins to walk back to our tent in the dark. So we said our goodbyes and grabbed our stuff. Then we flicked on the flashlights and exited the cabin. That particular day, I was more exhausted than usual, and as a result, I was at the back of our group and lagging behind a bit. I'd say we were about 3 minutes into our walk when I heard a very faint voice behind me. Andy. I stopped for a moment, wondering if I really heard someone calling my name, or if I was just succumbing to my fatigue and imagining things. But then I heard it again. Andy. It was clearer this time, a bit louder, and I could have sworn it sounded like Rosa's voice. I turned around and shone my flashlight in the direction I heard it, calling out Rosa's name, asking if she was there. And then I heard it again. Andy. It definitely sounded like Rosa's voice, but I was just confused as I couldn't figure out why she would have followed us into the forest at night. But then I figured maybe one of us forgot something and she was returning it to us. We were right next to their cabin, so it wouldn't take long for her to do that. With that reason in mind, I started walking towards the direction I heard it. But no matter where I shone my flashlight, I couldn't find her. Rosa, where are you? Again, I heard it calling my name. Andy, Andy. This time I stopped in my tracks. There was something wrong. I stood there frozen. The sound was definitely coming in front of me, but this time any thoughts I had about it being Rosa were gone. It may have sounded a bit like her, but it sounded off. The best way I can describe it is as if Rosa was talking through an old TV or a broken radio. It was staticky and distorted. I could feel there was something in front of me hiding from my flashlight, but it didn't feel normal. Whatever it really was, it didn't feel close, but I could tell it was close enough that if I just took a few more steps toward it, it wouldn't be a good idea. Contrary to what you might be thinking, I didn't feel scared, but confused. I definitely knew its intentions weren't to my benefit, but for all I knew, it may have been someone playing a prank on me, but I wasn't sure. "Andy, what are you standing there for?" The voice startled me a little as I spun around to see my Aunt Maria lightly jogging towards me. I let out a big breath. I didn't even know I was holding one in. She caught up to me, tugging at my arm as we power walked to catch up to my uncle and cousins. "I turned around and I didn't see you. I thought you got lost or something." Under normal circumstances, I would have responded with a sarcastic remark, but I was still in shock about what just happened, so I just mumbled out an apology in Spanish. But my aunt must have noticed how terrified I looked and stopped. "Hey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Seeing no reason to lie to her, I told her what happened, from the voice to it sounding strange, to the malevolent feeling I got when I walked towards it. You see, my family is Mexican, and as a result, we're very superstitious and often believe in the supernatural around us. But not in a "we fear them and demand the spirits leave this room before I shove this rosary down your throat" kind of way, but in a "we respect it" kind of way. And we often came to each other for advice if we were dealing with something we expected was supernatural, or things we didn't know better about. I was just hoping that maybe she'd give me an explanation as to what happened or what the thing may have been, but she just shrugged her shoulders. "Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it was a camper playing a trick." "Yeah, I guess," I said. I glanced back one last time to see if I could spot anything, and I swear, I could see the leg of something like a dog disappearing back into the shadows. Needless to say, I spent the next few minutes of the walk back to the tent between my aunt and uncle. The next morning back at the cabin, we were making breakfast, and I remembered what happened the night before. I asked Rosa if she went out looking for us last night. "No, silly. After you guys left, me and the kids sat on the couch watching TV until we fell asleep." "Why? Did something happen?" I shook my head and said to forget I asked. She gave me a weird look, but didn't ask me anything more. Later, I was wondering if Rosa was playing a prank on me, and I asked her husband if Rosa and her kids really were asleep on the couch after we left. He said they were. He was sitting at the table near the couch reading, and that they all slept there for at least an hour. Fast forward 4 years later, and I became close friends with someone who had quite a bit of experience with weird situations, things like the supernatural and paranormal. We often shared stories together about our experiences. When I told him about the strange experience while camping next to the cabin with my aunt and uncle, this person said without blinking, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a skinwalker." A little shocked and a bit curious, I asked why they were so sure. They explained that skinwalkers inhabit the southwest and west coast area of the US, and that they often imitate voices of the people they want to prey on, trying to lure them into a false sense of security. I've had to deal with a few of those things before, a bit of a pain to rid an area of. From my experience, don't be the last person in a group, because that's who they're going for, the easiest to separate. You're lucky your aunt caught up with you and brought you back before it got the chance to do God knows what. They also tend to take the shape of dogs and coyotes, so that leg you saw probably belonged to it. I felt a chill run down my back as I imagined myself coming face to face with a skinwalker if my aunt hadn't come to get me. Needless to say, I don't think I'll be camping on the West Coast anytime soon. Number 2. The Thing in the Woods, submitted by Alex. Around 10 years ago, my dad, our German Shepherd puppy Diamond, and I lived in a 25-acre woods in between the Georgia and Tennessee border. In our little cabin, unfortunately, there were a lot of weird goings-on, and this was the most memorable and terrifying event. In March of 2007, we were in the middle of a bad storm. Me and Diamond were watching an episode of The Dukes of Hazzard when the power went out. I, of course, being 14 years old, got immediately creeped out. I grabbed my mag light and started walking towards my dad's room. And then I heard someone at the door. So me, being an idiot teen, went to open the door to say hi to whoever it was. Then suddenly, my dad ran out of his room screaming like crazy, "Don't open the door!" So I stopped in my tracks and asked what's wrong, and what he said still makes me shake today. He told me there was a figure in the window, a figure that wasn't human, unlike any human or animal he'd ever seen. He said there was something beyond that door that wanted in, and we weren't going to let it. We then sat in the living room with a lantern and a few flashlights, just waiting out the storm and hoping that whatever was outside would go away. Just as we were drifting off to sleep from waiting so long, the door burst open. Before I could see what was happening, my dad grabbed me and everything we could carry, and we locked ourselves inside of his room. Diamond followed us. After locking the door, Dad grabbed his shotgun, and I asked if we should call the neighbors or 911. But then he reminded me that our nearest neighbor was 10 miles away, and it would take the police maybe 45 minutes. By then, we could already be dead. Diamond stood behind the door growling and waiting for whatever was behind it to come in. Whoever or whatever it was kept hammering at the door for 5 minutes until it all went quiet. We listened to the heavy footsteps exiting the cabin. They were twice as heavy as my dad's footsteps, as if this thing weighed over 500 pounds easily, but it was somehow still on 2 legs. We took the sudden calmness of the moment to call the police, and when they arrived, they questioned us. Then we drove to my grandmother's house. After that, we sold the cabin, and I never saw it again. My dad, of course, had to go back to get everything out that we wanted, but he would only go during the day, and he was armed with his shotgun. I don't know what visited us that cold night, but what I do remember seeing were tracks in the cabin as we left in a hurry. Tracks that weren't footprints. No, they looked more like hooves. Number 3. Forest Howl, submitted by Leviathan. My family and I visited our cabin for spring break last year. It was on top of a hill in Indiana, surrounded by forests throughout. On a side note, I've always been fascinated by the creatures I find, like snails and bats flying overhead at night. This year, however, it was far too cold for many of these animals to be out and about. So this time around, we stayed inside the cabin for the most part. No forest exploring or hiking. On our first night there, we lit a fire to enjoy our time there before the incoming rain the next few days. Since we were bored and had no s'mores to cook, we decided to tell some scary campfire stories, like any sane person would. My mom found one on her phone and began reading it, and I decided to close my eyes and relax next to the heat of the fire. It was comfortable, the perfect temperature, and a story to fall asleep to, with the background noise of a crackling fire. I was in a state of perfect relaxation when we all heard a howl of something outside. I snapped up, startled by the noise. My mom went quiet for a moment, shook her head, then continued to read, and my niece next to me simply listened. No one seemed too bothered by the howl. It could have been my imagination, but it was so real and vivid. Plus, I don't remember ever hearing a howl like that one. It was such an odd moment. But then, my mom asked me if I had heard something. What? Of course I had. She was suddenly acting like she didn't hear it. And the others were in agreement. Why had they reacted to it before? How could I have been the only one to hear something like that? This really bothered me, but I tried to shrug it off, and I went back to relaxing next to the fire. But then my dog started to growl at the door. She was staring upwards, as if ready for some intruder to burst in. And then came another howl. It was much more clear and close than before, like it was right outside the cabin. And it wasn't coming from the height of my dog. It sounded more like something the size of a person was walking around outside. And when I looked toward my family in a panic, they all pretended not to hear it. What was happening? Why was this happening? Was there something I didn't know? Something they thought I didn't need to know? For the rest of our stay at the cabin, even though I didn't hear it again. I couldn't enjoy myself or relax. There's something out in those woods, and I think it wanted in our cabin. Number 4. The Monster of Camp Road. Submitted by NOTTELLING 27. This happened when I was 9 years old. I was home alone, and it must have been 2 in the morning when I woke up from a deep sleep in our cabin. I was with my friend Luke at a summer camp. It was the second night, and everything was going great. But when 2 a.m. rolled around, we could hear something above us, something like a deep breathing and thumping sound. The night after that, after we exited the bathrooms, which were separate from our cabin, I was reprimanded by one of the counselors because I left the light in the bathroom on and I was the last one there. So I had to turn around and turn it off. I walked into the bathrooms and I turned the light off, but before I left, I felt suddenly freezing cold, and then I saw something horrifying through the small grated windows at the top of the bathroom. A slow and incredibly tall figure walking around the building in steady and heavy footsteps. It was so thin, and it must have been over 8 feet tall. From what I could see, I didn't get the whole picture, but the skin I could see was thin and gray, and there were bones jutting out of it. I ran back to the cabin. Luckily, nothing else happened that night. But at the end of the week, I went to the bathroom, and the lights were broken, and the door had been pulled off of it. Even after seeing something like that, I assumed it was someone being stupid and had destroyed the door. But even the counselors and other kids had no idea who or what had done that. Number 5. Sheriff's Camp. Submitted by SCARLETT S. Over the years, I would normally go to Sheriff's Camp in the summertime. It's a summer camp where you get to experience cool simulations of real situations, like tornadoes, fires, etc. The camp is split up between girls and boys. The boys sleep in tents near the lake, while the girls sleep in cabins in the woods. After we arrived that year, they did the "Welcome to Camp, here are the rules" speech. Then we proceeded to split up into our cabins and gather our things. We walked up to our cabins and got settled in. Then we walked down to the fire pit. The girls who were in charge of our cabin decided to tell us a ghost story. A story about a girl named Sally who had drowned in the lake, saying that she walks up the camp every night, blah blah blah. I was 11 at the time and I knew they were just trying to scare us, so I acted brave and pretty much blew them off. Later that night, we were in our cabin, windows open and everyone sleeping, and suddenly, Mal just started going ballistic, like she was freaking out. One of the older girls had to calm her down, and we finally understood what she was saying to us. She was still crying and said, "There was a girl in the window." At this point, I'm thinking she's going crazy. I ignore it and go back to bed. The next morning we get up, and Mal has all her stuff packed. She was leaving that day. Me and Nikki asked her why, thinking it was probably about the girl she saw, or claims she saw. She then lifts up her shirt. I found it hard to breathe. There were dozens of scratch marks all the way down her back. Me and Nikki are looking at each other, asking ourselves, what are we even seeing? Mal leaves, and I can't say I blame her. Later that night, we were talking about it, and Kate says, "Yeah, that's a little odd. Last night I thought I saw rainbow boots walking outside the cabin window." Me and Nikki think she's going insane as well, so we play it off. I didn't talk about it again. Nikki ended up leaving camp early because of a family thing, leaving me with Kate. The rest of the week goes off without incident. Now, at the time, I had a dog at home who would be having puppies at any moment. This will be important later. On the bus ride home, I had to sit with Kate. She was really talkative that day, until she suddenly just stopped and got dead quiet. She was just staring out the window. Her head wasn't moving. I ignored it because I was tired anyway. And then she suddenly says in a really, really deep voice, a voice that did not match an 11-year-old, "Something bad is going to happen." She still doesn't turn her head for the rest of the ride, so I switched seats because I'm so creeped out. I got home, and about a day later, my dog has her 12 puppies, but they all didn't make it. They were doing fine. There was no explanation as to why they didn't make it. And as for my dog herself, she passed away too, with no obvious explanation. Number 6. Bummer Camp. Submitted by Lily. It was about a year ago. My neighbor, who's a good friend of mine named Lily, went with me to a summer camp. We helped out as counselors to the young kids. The camp was on an island isolated from the world, or so it seemed. It was mid-June when we left for the island to go to camp. When we arrived, everything seemed normal except the fact Lily and I's cabin was deeper in the woods than everyone else's. You had to travel down a really long gravel path to get there. Now, I was really curious at that age, so I asked my friend if she wanted to go walk in the woods when it got dark out, just for the thrills. She agreed. That night we snuck out, trying not to wake up anyone else. We started walking down the path toward a large hill in the distance. We decided to start running toward the hill, and when we made it to the top, I looked out into the huge fields ahead. We saw some object flying toward us. It had 3 red lights that looked like dots against the night sky. My friend and I were paralyzed when we saw it. After we came to our senses, we took off running back to the cabin. We hid in the corner all night long and eventually fell asleep. When we woke up in the morning, we confirmed with each other that what we saw the night before was real, but we didn't tell the other counselors. That night, we decided to go back, this time a little later than last. We went back to the same spot, and when we arrived, we saw the 3 red lights again, coming from the object in the sky. It was even closer than before. As soon as we saw it, we screamed. It disappeared. Then we ran back to the cabin again and locked the door, regretting going back for a second time. We didn't sleep that night, but as soon as it was morning, I turned on the news and the report, which was about dozens more sightings of the exact same object we had seen. We had witnessed, along with almost 100 others, an actual UFO. I froze and Lily's face went pale. We went to the head counselor and told them about the incident. Unfortunately, no one believed us. All I know is I will never be visiting that camp again. Number 7. Creepy Hermit Encounter. Submitted by Jordan. I live in Burlington, Ontario, a nice lakeside city near Toronto. This story happened to me during a school trip when I was in the 8th grade. At my elementary school, which by the way was Catholic, everyone in grade 8 would get to go on 2 trips as part of their final year at the school. One trip took place in the fall, and it was usually a religious camping trip that took place about 40 minutes out of the city. By religious, I mean everyone had to participate in group activities that revolved around being a good Christian and teamwork. This, of course, completely sucked at this camp. It was little more than a religion class stretched over 3 days. The second trip took place in the spring, and was usually a trip to Ottawa for the weekend, where we could explore the city and visit museums. For some reason, it was decided my year would instead take another camping trip, about 4 hours away at Algonquin Provincial Park. The camp was on one of the many lakes in the park, and was set up like your pretty typical summer camp. Cabins were spread out near the lake, and partially in the forest, and there were bathrooms and a mess hall in separate buildings. As you would guess, boys and girls shared separate cabins. The girls' cabins were built on supports above the ground, and were closer to the lake. Our cabins were almost in the forest and built on the ground along a gravel road. I shared a larger cabin with about 4 other guys. Although ours was the largest, it was probably the least comforting. While the other cabins had actual windows and doors that would fully close and lock, our cabin looked like it was built from balsa wood, only had thin bug screens for windows, and a door that wouldn't completely close. I should also point out that I had no experience with actual camping, as my family hated it, so this was a pretty bad first impression. This is where the creepy part of the story starts. On the first evening, we were all gathered outside the mess hall for a fun night activity. The camp counselors told us about a hermit that lived in the nearby woods. The activity was that they were going to take us into the dark woods in groups to see where the hermit lived. This kind of caught us by surprise as it was kind of random, but intriguing at the same time. As you would expect, everyone was pretty much screaming as we were led deeper into the woods with only our flashlights, looking for this hermit's house. When we finally came across the house, which was little more than a huge log with a makeshift bed, we were led back to camp. Although my group didn't see anything, other people started talking about seeing someone creeping around the dark woods. Someone in my cabin even said they saw blue glowing eyes in the forest. I shrugged it off, thinking the whole hermit story was made up by the camp to scare us, and the person in the woods was probably just a counselor. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of someone sprinting down the gravel road near our cabin. At first I was startled, and then a little creeped out, but then I thought it may have just been some animal. That wasn't until I started hearing the gravel crunch around our cabin. It was very soft, but definitely a person outside. I was suddenly terrified. My bed was right beside the door that didn't lock. An animal could have easily pushed the door open on its own and walked inside if they wanted to. There was also nothing covering the screens, so the person outside could clearly see in. I was ready to scream as loud as possible if someone entered the cabin. I had my eyes locked on the door, anticipating to see it slowly open, but it never did. The sound outside slowly disappeared into the woods. Immediately, I thought it must have been the hermit. I ruled out the possibility of it being a counselor or teacher, because it was at least 3 a.m, which was a terrible time to check on the students. Surprisingly, I was able to fall back to sleep a short while later. That was the only interesting part of the camping trip, unfortunately. The rest of the trip was pretty dreadful. It rained non-stop for the remaining days, and a few people from my class caught the flu from another school that was sharing the camp with us, so the bus was partially quarantined on the way back home. As time passed, I mostly forgot about the creepy encounter, giving in to the possibility that it was just a counselor checking on us. The story doesn't end there, though. The following year, it was my younger sister's turn to go on the same 8th grade trip. Just like for my class, she also had to go on the weird hermit expedition during the first night. Although she initially thought nothing of it, during one of the other days when she and a few friends went exploring in the woods along the lake, she described seeing a small hermit-like person sitting on a log in the distance. I know this isn't the scariest camping story to be told, but it creeps me out knowing that the hermit was indeed real, and that the camp thought it was fun or funny to lead a bunch of kids to this random person's house in the middle of the woods. It's also a delight to know that the hermit also isn't afraid to peek on unsuspecting campers in the dead of night. It's been almost 10 years since this happened, and I haven't done anything camping related since. Number 8. Something Wasn't Right, submitted by Jake. I'm going to start by saying that I'm not exactly sure what me and a few friends experienced fully, but there was definitely something strange with us that night. This story takes place in fall of 2017. I was 16. A few friends and I went to a cabin campout with our Boy Scout troop. The first night we got there, it was the normal routine of unpacking and setting up our things. We made sure to set up near one of the power outlets, which me and a friend shared together as there were 2 in the room. The next morning was fairly normal. Hanging out, talking, playing card games, and on the GameCube someone brought. We even had a projector we had brought with us to play with. By the time lunch came around, we were out of bottles of water, so me and a few friends were asked to walk approximately a mile, maybe a little less, to a water pump to fill up 3 of the 5-gallon jugs we had. Now me, being the biggest one of the group, I had to carry them, but I knew that there was no possible way I could carry these things all the way back. 1, sure, but physically impossible to do all 3 or 2 for that matter. So we looked for something to help us on the way and found a sort of cart by some wooden building on the path there. It had 2 big wheels, a wooden body, and a bar that stuck out the front enough for me to fit in it and push it with the box-like thing behind me to pull the water jugs. We used this and filled up the water, which took longer than it should have, due to the other kids messing around with the pump. The pump was in front of a shower house with a lone light, and it was near the lake. So after that, we used this cart to bring the heavy jugs back and went on with our day. Well, by the time night came, they needed to be filled again. And of course, instead of waking up early when it was light out, my friend and I were sent to go right away in the middle of the night. I threw on my coat and some gloves to go out since it was cold, and we each took a flashlight. We started walking, me with the cardigan to make it easy for us. From the moment I stepped out the door, I had the sketchiest feeling I've ever had about something being out there with us. It was hard to describe. Like the feeling of being watched and that you know something is going to happen. I tried to calm myself, but I kept hearing noises in the distance and seeing movement out of the corner of my eyes. When we reached a spot in the path not too far from the cabin, where there was a little fenced-in area with canoes and kayaks and things like that, my body froze and the feeling tripled. I told my friend about the feeling before, but he kept saying it was nothing. I finally said at that point, "Dude, I can't do this. It's getting weird out here. We'll get up first thing in the morning." He wasn't having it, but went back anyway to get someone to go. I felt bad, but I truly had the feeling I was going to die out there. We went in, and I told one of the leaders, but they said it was probably just animals. We had heard and seen a coyote the night before and during the day. I was completely planning on staying, but then my friend said something along the lines of, "I'm going to get some real men to go with me." Well, right then and there I knew I couldn't let him insult me like that, but we figured a couple more people wouldn't hurt, Supposing we were attacked, we'd be able to team up on it. So with a couple of more people and an extra powerful headband flashlight loaned to me, we went back out, but the feeling soon came back. We started walking, and again by that fenced area, the feeling tripled. But we just walked faster past it. Now everyone started sharing my feeling, but we all kept an eye out and noticed animal tracks that weren't there before. We reached the pump and filled the water, while me and my friend loomed around. The lone yellowish light from the shower house left huge areas of creepy shadow, and there were noises coming from the lake. Just bullfrogs, I think. The feeling never left, but wasn't as strong as by those canoes from earlier. I kept seeing things lurking in the shadows and didn't trust it at all. As we head back, we kept observing strange things all around, and as we were walking, we would stop occasionally to hear distant footsteps. As we neared the canoe area, I hear my friend, the one originally with me, yell, "What the hell is that?" And we all bolted. At the time, I had a jacked up knee, with an additional 30 to 40 pints of the cart and water jugs with me. I still made sure not to be the last one in line. We made it back to the cabin in one piece. After we set the water down and my friend went just outside to get some air, I asked what he saw that made him react like that. He said when we reached the building I found the cart at, he saw a man in his peripheral vision sprinting at us in full speed. But when he blinked, the man was gone. I believed him since I thought I heard the running back then, and when I looked back I swore I saw the resemblance of a man's silhouette. The next morning we checked it out, but saw nothing but a few worn-out looking footprints. As we drove off that morning though, I got the feeling again as we drove past the fenced-in area. To this day, I'm not sure what happened that night. Was it all a strange coincidence, or was there some man stalking us? I don't remember the name of the place, so I couldn't even look into it if I was curious. But I do know I'll never go back there again. Because you never know who or what is lurking in the shadows. Number 9. This is why I don't go to summer camp. Submitted by Freya D. Camp Coleman was one of my favorite places. It was nestled by the Puget Sound with a lagoon of salt water but no fish. We were near the border of Washington and Oregon, and all the cabins had a deck overlooking the strip of land between the ocean and the lagoon, but our cabin was the nearest to it. All my cabin mates were about 14, just like me. The first night we were there, we played poker out on the deck for candy and other stuff we had brought, when a sickening noise like nails across a chalkboard, but louder and higher pitched, rang out. We all froze. The sound seemed to be coming from all directions. We all ran inside, telling our cabin leaders what happened, but they just told us it might be a pack of coyotes, but we knew better. That night while we were sleeping, I woke up to the sound again, but I wasn't the only one. 2 of my cabin mates had woke up too. We decided that tomorrow we were going to the library. This library had all the animal sounds at Camp Coleman on a kiosk by the front door. We looked up all the animals we thought could possibly make that noise, but nothing matched. We asked other cabins if they had heard it, but no one had. We were so afraid to go back that night, we even volunteered to clean up after dinner. When we finally were forced back to the cabin, we all got ready for bed. Worried we might hear the noise again, we shut all the windows and locked the doors. That night we heard the sound once more, but it was louder somehow, closer. That entire week the sound only seemed to get louder and closer every night. Then, on that first Sunday, I told my closest friend that we should stay up and see if we could locate the sound. We stayed up reading and passing notes. The noise burst through the back door, seemingly only for us because no one else woke up. We were so afraid to step out onto the deck, but I'll never forget what we saw. There was a humanoid figure with long arms and claws dangling down its skeletal torso. I didn't see any visible head. It was standing near the lagoon. It seemed like only a shadow moving like an ape on all fours. Then it seemed to just fade away into nothing. The sound never came back that summer, but I still have a clear image in my head that keeps me up at night. What lives in that lagoon, I wonder? Hopefully I never find out. And number 10, Scary Camp Experience, submitted by Ikmik L. Last summer I attended a camp in Maine called Lakeview Summer Camp. This was my first year at Camp Lakeview, and nothing extremely scary happened to me personally. The following tale, though, is about a counselor who was in my cabin told by various other witnesses. The counselor's name was Andrew and was apparently from Florida. He seemed nice enough to me. He let me plug in my iPod in the outlet above my bed if he could use my fidget spinner. One day he was missing for quite a while. Word started getting around the cabin that he had pushed one of the campers in our cabin onto a rock and was apparently in trouble. Things quieted down for another day until another incident happened with another camper in our cabin. This got him kicked out of the camp for good. After he left, the following stories our counselors told us really creeped me out. Apparently, the counselor had been paying a little too much attention to the two boys that he pushed. This really disturbed the boys. One of them, a 14-year-old, would not stop crying, and believe me when I say it's hard to make him cry. Our counselors also told us that he had touched other campers and had made inappropriate comments to others. I'm so glad that I wasn't one of the ones he targeted, that I had a bed as far away from him as possible under the most awesome counselor ever. As for you, Andrew the counselor, I hope we never meet again. Whether you're at a summer camp with other kids and staying in a cabin, or you have your own cabin out in the woods to get away from civilization, cabins usually always mean being separated from other people. Well, the sophisticated and sane ones at least, because most of the time when you're in a cabin, you're out in the middle of nowhere, enjoying the scenery. All the while, the creatures of the night and the psychopaths wander about, wondering who their next victim will be. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your creepy Disney World or Disneyland stories soon at darknessprevails.org/submit. If you want to support this channel, you can go to morbidmonsters.com and buy some Darkness Prevails themed decals, stickers, mugs, and t-shirts. Or if possible, just donate $1 a month at patreon.com/darknessprevails. One day, if we get enough donations on Patreon, I won't need to depend on YouTube anymore, which means Darkness Prevails will be eternal. Now, as promised, here are those 5 favorite early comments from my previous video on 10 true scary Starbucks stories. Fluffy Flappy says, "What's the scariest thing you found in your drink?" Well, I've never really found anything in a drink, but a while back my wife and I bought a 20-ounce bottle of Pure Leaf sweet tea from Walmart. But instead of tea, I believe what they gave us was half sweet tea and half jalapeno juice. Damn near threw up when I drank that. George Suleika says, "Do you even lift, bro?" No lift, only stroke. Sammy Winchester says, "Darkness, the facts you post in the videos make me cringe so hard." Cringe in a good way? Like when I watch a PewDiePie video? Play Nice says, "Hey, love you so much, man. What's the longest video you've ever done?" Well, I did a couple of 60-story compilations a while back, and I'm thinking of doing another 60-story compilation soon. I just don't know what topic I should do. Something general. And Slushy Ghost says, "Isn't Starbucks the currency they use in outer space?" Oh my god. I'm done. I quit. No more YouTube for this guy. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening. As always, stay safe out there and stay creepy.